Good evening, and welcome to our quiet space. Tonight we will not be discussing the history of wars or fallen empires. We will be visiting the mind of one man. A man whose name is synonymous with mystery and melancholy. Edgar Allan Poe. We all know him. We know his stories of the raven, of the telltale heart beating beneath the floorboards, of the pit and the pendulum. He is the architect of the modern nightmare. But tonight we will ask a much stranger question. A question that has been whispered among historians and lovers of mystery for over a century. Was Edgar Allan Poe just a writer, or was he something else? Is it possible this tormented man, whose life was filled with tragedy, had a secret that transcended space and time? Did Edgar Allan Poe have a time machine? It sounds like fiction, of course, but our story tonight is about the thin veil between what we write and what truly happens. So let us begin our journey. Take a breath and let it go. Let your mind wander. Let us meet the man, Edgar Poe, born in 1809. His was not a happy life. He was an orphan before he was 3 years old, taken in but never formally adopted. He was always an outsider. He was bright, brilliant, but restless. He tried university. He tried the military at West Point. He failed at both. He fought with his foster father. He was always poor, always struggling. And he was surrounded by death. His birth mother died of tuberculosis. His foster mother died of tuberculosis. And then his greatest love, his young wife, his cousin, Virginia Clem, she too died slowly and painfully of tuberculosis. Imagine a man sitting in a cold room, listening to that haunting cough from the next room, watching life fade day after day. What does a life like that do to a mind? It makes it obsessed with boundaries, the boundary between life and death, the boundary between sanity and madness, and perhaps the boundary between the present and the future.
Poe was a master of puzzles. He loved codes, cryptography. He once boasted that no code existed that he could not break. He saw patterns where others saw only chaos. And he wrote poems that sounded like mournful music. He wrote the first detective stories. See Auguste Dupin. He invented the genre. And he wrote of psychological horror, of the mind collapsing in on itself. He only wrote one novel in his entire life, a strange book, one that he himself later called a very silly book. It was published in 1838. The title was The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. And it is within the pages of this failed, strange novel that we find our proof, our whisper of a time machine. Let us open the book. The story is about a young man, Arthur Gordon Pym, who stows away on a whaling ship called the Grampus. The journey is a disaster from the start. There is mutiny. There is a terrible storm that destroys the ship. It capsizes, its hull torn apart. Only 4 men survive. They are adrift on the open ocean on the wreckage of the ship under a burning sun. They have no food. They have no water. Days pass in agony. They begin to hallucinate. The hunger becomes an unbearable pain. They start to look at each other in a new, terrible way. They decide to draw lots, to sacrifice one man so the others might live. Poe writes this scene with vivid, awful detail. They draw straws or splinters of wood, and the loser of the lot is a young man, a cabin boy, the one who had protested the most. His name is Richard Parker. Poe writes how the three survivors then kill Richard Parker, and to survive, they feed on his remains. It was a scene so brutal, so taboo, that critics in 1838 were disgusted. The novel failed and was quickly forgotten, a strange footnote in Poe's career. Poe himself continued his tragic life, wrote The Raven, lost his wife, Virginia, and finally, in 1849, he was found delirious in the streets of Baltimore, wearing another man's clothes, and died days later. The cause of his death remains a mystery. He was gone, and his novel about Arthur Gordon Pym and the gruesome fate of Richard Parker slept on dusty library shelves. Just a grim story from a grim mind. Until 46 years later. The year is 1884. Edgar Allan Poe is long dead. A small English yacht called the Mignonette set sail from Southampton, bound for Australia. On board are 4 crew members: Captain Tom Dudley, 2 sailors, Edwin Stevens and Edmund Brooks, and a young cabin boy, an orphan, 17 years old, who had come along for the adventure. Thousands of miles from land, in the Atlantic Ocean, a storm hits the yacht. A rogue wave smashes the vessel to pieces in an instant. The 4 crewmen manage to leap into a small, flimsy dinghy. They have only 2 cans of turnips and no fresh water. They are adrift on an endless ocean. The sun burns them by day. The thirst is torture. They try to drink their own urine. They try to catch a sea turtle and drink its blood, but it is not enough. Days pass into weeks. They are dying. The cabin boy, the youngest and weakest, in his desperation drinks seawater. It is a fatal mistake. He becomes violently ill. He lies in the bottom of the boat, dying of dehydration. Captain Dudley begins to think the unthinkable. He knows the boy will die, and he knows the 3 of them will also die if they do not do something. He proposes drawing lots, just as in Poe's book, but the sailor Brooks refuses. So Dudley and Stevens decide they must act. They wait until the boy is asleep or unconscious.
Then Captain Dudley says a prayer, and with a small penknife, he kills him. For the next 4 days, the 3 survivors stay alive by eating the flesh and drinking the blood of the cabin boy. 4 days later, a German ship finds them. They are rescued, and they tell their story. Their horrific tale becomes a global sensation, a famous legal case that would define the law of survival at sea. But that is not what stunned the world. It wasn't just the similarity of the story to Poe's strange novel, published 46 years earlier. What made the world's blood run cold was the name of the cabin boy who was killed and eaten aboard the Mignonette. His name was Richard Parker. 46 years before it happened, Edgar Allan Poe had written it. Not just the scenario, the name. Richard Parker. How? This is where our question returns. This is where the strange theory is born. Was this just a coincidence, the most horrific coincidence in literary history? Or was it something more? Let us ponder the idea that Poe somehow knew. What if this man, obsessed with codes and puzzles, had solved the greatest puzzle of all, the puzzle of time? Imagine Poe in his cold attic in Richmond or Baltimore. The world outside is quiet. He is not writing. He is listening. Listening to a strange machine he built of brass and glass and clock parts. A machine humming softly in the corner, catching echoes from the future, whispers of events to come. Or perhaps the machine was not made of metal. Perhaps the machine was his own mind. We know his life was a tragedy. He lived on the border between this world and the next. What if, in his grief, in his fevers, he was often ill? He received visions, visions so clear, so specific, that he mistook them for his own imagination. He wrote Arthur Gordon Pym not as a novel, but claimed it was a true memoir. What if it was real? Not a memoir of the past, but an echo of the future. A report he had received across time of the tragic fate of the mignonette and the unfortunate Richard Parker. Poe, the lover of codes, may have hidden his secret in plain sight, inside the only novel he ever wrote, a book he called Silly, perhaps to distract us from its terrible truth. It is a haunting theory, a perfect ghost story. But like Poe's own detective, Auguste Dupin, we must also look at the calmer facts. We must search for the logical explanation. Let us take a breath and look at the other possibility, the possibility that is less magical, but perhaps more human. Coincidence. It is a simple but powerful word. The universe is vast and time is long. Sometimes strange patterns emerge. Sometimes echoes happen naturally. And there is another fact. The name Richard Parker turns out to have been a somewhat common name for English sailors in the 19th century. There are several historical records of sailors named Richard Parker involved in mutinies or troubles at sea long before Poe wrote his book. Perhaps Poe, a voracious reader, had come across one of these reports, and the name lodged itself in his subconscious, a name that sounded fitting for a sacrificial cabin boy. And the act of cannibalism itself, how magical is that? The patterns of human thought are similar. Poe was a master of the psychology of darkness. He simply asked himself, what is the worst possible thing that could happen on the open sea? What would desperate men do to survive? His dark imagination simply found the honest, terrible answer. 46 years later, Captain Dudley and his crew were faced with the exact same question, and in reality, they came to the same terrible conclusion that Poe had imagined. So perhaps Poe did not have a time machine made of brass and glass. Perhaps the time machine was his genius, his ability to understand the darkest human heart so profoundly that he could predict its actions under the most extreme duress. We will never know for sure, and perhaps that is the beauty of it. The mystery will remain Poe's. He would have liked that. He left us with a perfect puzzle, a strange mirror between fiction and reality that we cannot fully solve, a code that may have no answer.
Was he a prophet? A time traveler? Or just a tormented writer who understood us better than we understand ourselves? Our story for tonight has ended. The story of a forgotten novel and a terrible echo from the sea. The story of Richard Parker and Richard Parker. Now, let your mind release this mystery. Let it drift into dreams. You are safe. You are comfortable. And it is time to rest. Let the silence and the quiet dark carry you into a deep and peaceful sleep. Good night.